The early morning bustle of Norfolk Naval Station was in full swing as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams made his way across the sprawling base. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the concrete as sailors hurried to their posts, their crisp white uniforms a stark contrast against the gray buildings that dominated the landscape. Marcus moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent over 2 decades navigating these pathways, his weathered face impassive as junior officers stepped aside to let him pass. At 52, he was older than most of the men and women who served alongside him, his salt and pepper hair and the deep lines etched around his eyes telling the story of a man who had seen more than his fair share of the world's troubles. The maintenance hangar loomed ahead, a cavernous structure that housed the beating heart of the Navy's aircraft repair operations. Inside, the cacophony of metal on metal, the hiss of pneumatic tools, and the occasional bark of orders created a symphony of organized chaos. Marcus slipped through the side entrance, nodding briefly to the security officer who barely glanced up from his clipboard. It was a familiar routine. Marcus coming in early, staying late, moving through the base like a ghost. Essential, but invisible. "Morning, Chief," called out Lieutenant Commander Ramirez, a young officer who had transferred to Norfolk 3 months ago. Unlike most, Ramirez made a point of acknowledging Marcus, though their interactions rarely went beyond perfunctory greetings. "Lieutenant," Marcus replied with a respectful nod, his deep voice carrying the slight drawl of his Mississippi upbringing. He continued toward his workstation, where the disassembled engine of an FA-18 Super Hornet awaited his expertise. This was where Marcus truly belonged, hands deep in the intricate machinery that kept the Navy's birds in the air. Each bolt, each valve, each circuit was a puzzle piece that he understood with an intuition that bordered on the supernatural. The sailors called it the Williams touch, though rarely to his face. By midday, the hangar had filled with technicians and engineers, their conversations adding to the industrial din. Marcus worked mostly in silence, occasionally offering guidance to the younger mechanics who sought his wisdom. His reputation as the best aircraft mechanic on the base wasn't an exaggeration. Marcus had saved more planes and, by extension, more pilots than anyone cared to count. Yet, as he moved between workstations, offering quiet corrections and demonstrating complex repairs, most eyes slid past him, focusing instead on the officers who strutted through the hangar, clipboard in hand, authority in their stride. "Heads up, Admiral on deck!" The call rang out, and the hangar fell into immediate silence as Rear Admiral James Thornton strode in, flanked by a group of fresh-faced naval cadets. The admiral was a tall man with a commanding presence, his chest adorned with rows of colorful ribbons that told of a distinguished career. "At ease," Thornton said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hangar. "These young men and women are our newest recruits, getting their first look at real naval aviation maintenance. Lieutenant Reynolds will be giving them a tour of our facilities." The technicians returned to their work. Though the energy in the hangar had shifted, everyone suddenly more aware of their posture, their language, their efficiency. Marcus, however, remained unchanged, his focus unwavering as he carefully calibrated a fuel injector with precision that came from years of practice. "And over here," Lieutenant Reynolds' voice carried across the hangar as he led the group of cadets toward the section where Marcus worked. "We have our maintenance team working on the FA-18 engines. These engines are the heart of our air superiority fighters, capable of producing over 44,000 pounds of thrust." The cadets murmured appreciatively, eyes wide as they took in the complex machinery. Marcus didn't look up, his hands steady as he continued his work. The group would pass by as they always did, their attention focused on the shiny parts, the big numbers, the impressive statistics, not on the man who made it all work. "Any questions?" Reynolds asked, already beginning to usher the group toward the next station. "Sir, who's that?" A young voice cut through the usual routine, and for a moment, the well-rehearsed tour faltered. Marcus glanced up to see a young cadet, no more than 19 or 20, pointing directly at him. The recruit was tall and lanky, with closely cropped hair and earnest eyes that held none of the dismissive glaze that Marcus had grown accustomed to seeing. Lieutenant Reynolds looked momentarily confused, as if he hadn't noticed Marcus standing there. "That's Chief Petty Officer Williams. He's part of our maintenance crew." The cadet, Peters according to the name stitched onto his uniform, kept his eyes fixed on Marcus. "Is he the one they call the miracle worker?" A ripple of surprise moved through the group. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Where did you hear that term, cadet?" Peters stood straighter. "My father was a pilot here, sir, AV-8B Harrier Squadron. He said there was a mechanic at Norfolk who could diagnose a problem just by listening to an engine. Said this man saved his life when he fixed an issue that everyone else had missed. Called him the miracle worker. Said if it wasn't for him, I'd have grown up without a father." The hangar had grown quiet again, but this time the silence had a different quality. Eyes that had previously skimmed past Marcus now fixed on him with newfound curiosity. Marcus set down his tools, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "Your father?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "What's his name?" "Commander Thomas Peters, sir. Flew with VMA 542 back in 2006. Marcus's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or a memory long buried. "Good man, your father. That Harrier had a hairline crack in the turbine blade. Not something the standard diagnostics would catch." Peters nodded eagerly. "That's exactly what he said. He told me to look for you if I ever got stationed here. Said I should shake the hand of the man who made sure I had a dad growing up." Before Marcus could respond, Admiral Thornton stepped forward, his gaze sharpening as he studied Marcus with new interest. "I wasn't aware we had a celebrity in our maintenance crew, Chief Williams." "No celebrity, sir," Marcus replied evenly. "Just doing my job." The Admiral hummed thoughtfully. "Lieutenant Reynolds, continue the tour. I'd like a word with Chief Williams." As Reynolds led the cadets away, Peters glanced back over his shoulder, his expression a mix of awe and gratitude. Marcus watched them go, then turned to face the Admiral, his posture straightening automatically. "How long have you been at Norfolk, Chief?" Thornton asked, his tone casual but his eyes shrewd. 23 years, sir." 23 years, Thornton repeated, sounding almost surprised. "And in all that time, how many commendations have you received?" Marcus hesitated. 3, sir." 3, the Admiral echoed, his brow furrowing. "That seems insufficient given what I just heard. This isn't the first time someone has mentioned your extraordinary abilities, though I admit I hadn't connected the dots until now. The stories circulate. A mechanic with an uncanny ability to diagnose issues that sophisticated equipment misses. I assumed they were exaggerated." "People like their myths, sir," Marcus said quietly. Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly. "Modesty is admirable, Chief, but false modesty serves no one. Tell me about the Peters case." Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. "It was a routine maintenance check. The Harrier had passed all standard protocols, but something about the sound of the engine didn't sit right. I insisted on a more thorough inspection and found a crack that would have led to catastrophic failure mid-flight. And how many similar cases have there been over your career?" Marcus didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting to the engine parts spread out before him. "I don't keep count, sir." "Well, perhaps someone should," Thornton said, his tone sharpening. "Report to my office tomorrow at 800, Chief Williams. I think it's time we had a proper conversation about your role here at Norfolk." With that, the Admiral turned and strode away, leaving Marcus standing alone amid the engines and tools that had been his silent companions for over 2 decades. Around him, the hangar had returned to its normal rhythm, but there was a difference now. Sidelong glances, whispered conversations, curious stares. The invisible man had suddenly become visible, and Marcus wasn't sure how he felt about that. As the day wore on, more people approached him, mechanics seeking advice, officers who had previously overlooked him now eager to engage in conversation. Marcus answered their questions politely but briefly, unaccustomed to the attention and somewhat wary of it. By the time his shift ended, he was exhausted not from the physical labor he was used to, but from the social interactions that had drained him in ways steel and grease never could. The walk back to his modest off-base apartment felt longer than usual. Marcus moved through the gathering dusk, his mind replaying the day's events, particularly the moment when young Cadet Peters had recognized him. Not his face, they had never met, but his reputation, his work. It was an unusual feeling, being seen not just as a pair of hands that fixed machines, but as a person whose actions had made a difference. His apartment was small but meticulously organized, much like the engines he repaired. Marcus moved through his evening routine with the same efficiency he applied to his work. Dinner, shower, a few minutes of reading before bed. But as he settled under the covers, his thoughts kept returning to the Admiral's words and the meeting scheduled for tomorrow. 23 years of showing up, doing his job, and going home. 23 years of being essential, yet invisible. 23 years of saving lives without recognition or reward beyond the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. And now, because of one cadet's question, everything might change. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. As sleep finally claimed him, Marcus wondered what tomorrow would bring. He had no way of knowing that the meeting with Admiral Thornton would be just the beginning, that the mark he had left on countless aircraft and, by extension, countless lives was about to come into sharp focus, changing not just his own future, but the future of naval aviation maintenance forever. The following morning arrived with the shrill beep of Marcus's alarm clock. He woke instantly, a habit formed during his early days in the Navy. The digital display read 0500, 3 hours before his meeting with Admiral Thornton. Marcus moved through his morning routine with methodical precision, but beneath his calm exterior, an unusual tension coiled within him. In 23 years, he had spoken directly to an admiral exactly twice, once during a base-wide inspection, and once when receiving a commendation for preventing a potential hangar fire. Neither conversation had lasted more than 30 seconds. As he buttoned his uniform, Marcus caught his reflection in the mirror. The face that stared back at him was weathered by years of service, eyes that had seen the inside of more aircraft than most pilots. What did the Admiral want? The question had kept him awake for most of the night, spinning possibilities in his mind like the turbines he so often repaired. Norfolk Naval Station was already alive with activity when Marcus arrived, the familiar symphony of a military base at work. He made his way toward the administrative building, a structure markedly different from his usual domain of hangars and repair bays. Here the floors were polished to a high shine, the walls adorned with photographs of ships, aircraft, and stern-faced men in decorated uniforms. Marcus felt out of place, his calloused hands and the faint smell of engine oil that never quite washed away marking him as a visitor from another world. "Chief Williams," a young ensign called out, approaching with brisk steps. "Admiral Thornton is ready for you now. Please follow me." The ensign led him down a corridor to a door marked simply, "Rear Admiral James Thornton, Naval Aviation Command." He knocked once, sharp and precise, then opened the door. "Chief Petty Officer Williams, sir." "Send him in," came the response from within. Marcus stepped into the office, immediately noting the stark contrast to his cluttered workstation. The room was spacious and meticulously organized, with a large desk dominating one end and a small conference table at the other. The walls were adorned with photographs and commendations, telling the story of a distinguished naval career. Behind the desk, Large windows offered a panoramic view of the harbor, where gray warships stood silent sentinel. Admiral Thornton rose from his chair, extending his hand. "Chief Williams, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Marcus shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip, and sat in one of the chairs facing the desk. "Thank you, sir." The Admiral remained standing, moving to a side table where a coffee pot sat. "Coffee?" "Yes, sir. Black, please." Thornton poured 2 cups, handed one to Marcus, then settled back behind his desk. He didn't speak immediately, instead studying Marcus over the rim of his cup, his eyes thoughtful. The silence stretched, but Marcus didn't fidget or attempt to fill it. He had learned long ago that patience was as valuable a tool as any wrench or screwdriver. "I've been reviewing your service record," Thornton finally said, tapping a folder on his desk. "It's interesting reading." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, waiting for the Admiral to continue. 23 years at Norfolk. Before that, 4 years at Pensacola. 4 commendations, 3 Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals, and a file full of unofficial notes from pilots and maintenance officers praising your work. Thornton leaned back in his chair. "Yet you've never been promoted beyond Chief Petty Officer. You've been recommended for Senior Chief 6 times, but each time you've withdrawn your name from consideration. Why?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. He set his coffee cup down carefully. "I'm comfortable where I am, sir. Senior Chief would mean more administrative duties, less time with the aircraft." Thornton's expression revealed nothing. "That's what your previous COs noted as well. But there's something else in these reports, a pattern that becomes clear when you read between the lines." He flipped open the folder. "You've personally trained over 75 mechanics who have gone on to become Senior Chiefs, warrant officers, even commissioned officers. Every single one of them credits you with their success. Yet you remain in the shadows." Marcus shifted slightly in his chair, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I prefer to let my work speak for itself, sir." "And it does," Thornton agreed, "but perhaps too quietly." He pulled out another file, this one considerably thicker. "After our encounter yesterday, I had my staff do some digging. This file contains reports of aircraft incidents over the past 2 decades where catastrophic failure was averted due to what the reports call exceptional maintenance procedures. Your name appears in 73 of them." Marcus remained silent, his coffee forgotten. 73 incidents, Chief Williams. 73 potential disasters that didn't happen because you caught something others missed. Do you know how many lives that represents?" "I was just doing my job, sir." "No," Thornton said firmly, leaning forward. "Your job is to follow maintenance protocols. What you've been doing goes far beyond that. You have a gift, Chief, an intuitive understanding of these machines that can't be taught or replicated, and for some reason, you've been allowed to hide that gift under a bushel for far too long." Marcus looked down at his hands, strong, calloused hands that knew the feel of every piece of machinery in the Navy's arsenal. "With respect, sir, I haven't been hiding anything. I've been right where I was assigned, doing what needed to be done." "And that's precisely the problem," Thornton said. "You were assigned and then forgotten, left to work your quiet miracles while others took the credit. Did you know that Lieutenant Commander Dawson received a commendation for the early detection of fatigue issues in the F-35 fleet 3 years ago?" "Yes, sir, it was well deserved." "Was it?" Thornton raised an eyebrow. "Because according to this report filed by Lieutenant Rivera, it was your insistence on checking the composite materials along the wing route that led to the discovery. Dawson initially dismissed your concerns." Marcus remained silent. It was true. He had noticed a subtle change in the way the newest F-35s handled during ground tests, a vibration that shouldn't have been there. But once the issue was found and fixed, he had been content to step back into the shadows, letting Dawson take the lead on implementing the fleet-wide inspections. "Your silence is telling," Thornton said quietly. "Chief, I've been in the Navy for 30 years. I've seen every type of sailor there is. The glory seekers, the by-the-book officers, the lifers just marking time until retirement. But in all those years, I've never encountered someone with your combination of skill and invisibility. Is that why I'm here, sir? Because I don't seek the spotlight? You're here because yesterday, a cadet made me realize that one of the most valuable assets in naval aviation has been hiding in plain sight for over 2 decades. Thornton closed the folder and leaned forward. "And I want to know why." The question hung in the air between them, demanding an answer that Marcus wasn't sure he could provide. He had never articulated even to himself the complex web of reasons that had kept him in the same position for so long, had made him content to let others shine while he worked in the background. "It's complicated, sir," he finally said. "I've got time." Marcus took a deep breath. "When I first joined the Navy, I had dreams like anyone else. Advancement, recognition, maybe even officer candidate school eventually, but I quickly learned that some doors didn't open as easily for me as they did for others." "Because you're black," Thornton said directly. Marcus met his gaze. "Yes, sir. Not everywhere, and not with everyone, but often enough to notice a pattern. I was held to a different standard, had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. After a while, I stopped expecting it. And started avoiding it," Thornton added. "I focused on what I could control, the machines. They don't care about the color of my skin. They respond to skill, to understanding. I found I could make a difference there, even if no one noticed. And eventually, it became a habit," Thornton finished for him, "staying invisible." "Yes, sir, I suppose it did." The Admiral nodded slowly, as if Marcus had confirmed something he already suspected. "Well, Chief Williams, I'm afraid your days of invisibility are coming to an end." He stood up, moving to look out the window at the harbor. "The Navy is changing, has been changing for years, but not fast enough in some ways. What happened to you, being overlooked, undervalued, is a failure of leadership. My leadership, and those who came before me." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that admission, so he remained silent. Thornton turned back to face him. "I'm establishing a new advanced diagnostic and training division within Naval Aviation Maintenance. Its purpose will be to develop new methodologies for aircraft troubleshooting and to train the next generation of maintenance personnel. I want you to head it." The proposal was so unexpected that Marcus felt momentarily disoriented. "Sir, I'm not qualified to—" "You're the only one who is qualified," Thornton interrupted. "This isn't about rank or academic credentials. It's about that intuitive understanding you possess, the ability to hear what the aircraft is telling you. We need to capture that knowledge, codify it if possible, and pass it on. Too many lives depend on it." Marcus shook his head slightly. "Admiral, I appreciate the offer, but I'm a mechanic, not a teacher or a program director. According to the 75 successful careers you've launched, you're an exceptional teacher." Thornton smiled faintly. "As for being a program director, well, that's what staff is for. Your job would be to do what you've always done. Listen to the machines and teach others to hear what you hear." The offer hung in the air between them, tantalizing and terrifying in equal measure. After decades of working in the shadows, the thought of stepping into the light, of having his name associated with a program, of being visible, it sent a cold shiver of anxiety through Marcus's chest. Thornton seemed to sense his hesitation. "I'm not asking for an answer today, Chief. Take some time to think about it, but know this, whatever you decide, things are going to change. Your contributions will not go unrecognized any longer. That time is over." With those words, a chapter of Marcus's life closed definitively. Whether he accepted this new role or not, he could never go back to the comfortable anonymity that had been his armor for so long. The thought was both liberating and deeply unsettling. Marcus left the Admiral's office with his mind in turmoil. The immaculate corridors of the administration building seemed to stretch endlessly before him as he made his way out, his body moving on autopilot while his thoughts raced. The weight of Thornton's words pressed down on him like a physical presence. A new division. His division. After decades of blending into the background, the Admiral wanted to put him center stage. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, bathing the base in golden light. Marcus paused, momentarily disoriented. He should be in the hangar by now, elbow deep in an engine. Instead, he stood exposed in the open, feeling the eyes of passing sailors on him. Had word already spread? Or was it his imagination, heightened by the sudden disruption of his carefully constructed routine? "Chief Williams," a voice called out, breaking through his reverie. Marcus turned to see Lieutenant Commander Ramirez approaching, his usual brisk stride even quicker than normal. "Lieutenant," Marcus acknowledged with a nod. "I heard you had a meeting with Admiral Thornton this morning," Ramirez said, falling into step beside him. The casual way he mentioned it confirmed Marcus's suspicion. Word traveled fast on a naval base. "News gets around," Marcus replied neutrally. Ramirez grinned. "When the Admiral personally requests a meeting with a chief, people take notice. Want to grab some coffee and tell me what it was about?" The invitation was unprecedented. In the 3 months since Ramirez had transferred to Norfolk, their interactions had been limited to professional necessities. Now, suddenly, the officer was seeking him out, curious about his business with the Admiral. "Thank you, sir, but I need to get to the hangar. We've got 3 birds waiting on maintenance." Ramirez looked disappointed but nodded. "Of course. Another time, perhaps. I'm heading that way myself. Mind if I walk with you?" They made their way toward Hangar 3, Ramirez filling the silence with casual conversation about aircraft performance statistics. Safe, technical ground that required little from Marcus, beyond occasional nods of agreement. But as they neared the hangar, Ramirez's tone shifted. "You know, Williams, I've been watching you work since I got here," he said, his voice lower now. "The way you handle those engines, it's not just technical skill, it's like you have a relationship with them." Marcus glanced at him, surprised by the observation. "I flew combat missions in Afghanistan," Ramirez continued. "There were times when my aircraft didn't sound right, didn't feel right, but all the diagnostics said everything was fine. Once I refused to fly a mission because of it. My CO thought I was crazy, but the next pilot who took that bird had an engine flame out at 20,000 feet, barely managed to eject in time." He paused, eyes fixed on some distant memory. "After that, I started to believe that these machines talk to us, if we know how to listen." For the first time, Marcus really looked at Ramirez, not as an officer to be respectfully acknowledged, but as a person. What he saw was genuine interest, perhaps even a kindred spirit. "They do talk," Marcus admitted quietly. "Each one has its own voice, its own way of telling you when something's not right. Most people never learn to hear it." "But you do," Ramirez said, not a question but a statement of fact. Before Marcus could respond, they reached the hangar entrance. The familiar sounds and smells enveloped him. The metallic tang of tools, the sharp scent of hydraulic fluid, the steady hum of machinery. It should have been comforting, this domain where he had ruled quietly for so long. Instead, it felt different somehow, as if the very air had shifted. Inside, the usual activity continued. Technicians moving with purpose, the clang of tools, the occasional burst of laughter. But as Marcus entered, a ripple effect spread across the floor. Conversations paused, heads turned, eyes followed his progress. The invisible man had become the center of attention. "Williams!" Senior Chief Mendoza called out, approaching with a speed that suggested urgency. "You've got visitors." Marcus followed Mendoza's nod toward his workstation. Standing beside the partially disassembled FA-18 engine were two figures, a tall officer in aviator sunglasses and the young cadet from yesterday, Peters. "Commander Peters wanted to meet you personally," Mendoza explained, a note of something like awe in his voice. "Been waiting almost an hour." Marcus felt a strange tightness in his chest. Thomas Peters, the pilot whose Harrier he had saved all those years ago, the father of the cadet who had recognized his name. Another piece of his past stepping into the light. "Thank you, Senior Chief," Marcus said quietly. "Lieutenant Ramirez, if you'll excuse me." "Of course, Chief," Ramirez replied, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We'll continue our conversation another time." As Ramirez departed, Marcus approached his workstation, acutely aware of the eyes tracking his progress across the hangar floor. Commander Peters removed his sunglasses as Marcus approached, revealing eyes that matched his son's, warm, intelligent, and currently filled with something that looked remarkably like reverence. "Chief Williams," the commander said, extending his hand, "I've been waiting a long time to thank you properly." Marcus accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip and the emotion barely contained beneath the officer's professional demeanor. "No thanks necessary, sir. Just doing my job." "That's not how I see it," Peters replied, his voice low and intense. "My son told me he found you yesterday. When he called me last night." He paused, collecting himself. "I was stationed in Japan when I got the news that my wife was expecting. I flew that Harrier you fixed across 3 combat zones to get back for his birth. If you hadn't caught that turbine issue..." The words hung in the air, the unspoken alternative a shadow between them. "Dad's told me the story my whole life," young Cadet Peters interjected, his eyes bright with admiration. "About the mechanic who heard something wrong when no one else could, who insisted on checking even when everyone said it was fine. He said it was like you could speak to the aircraft." Marcus felt a warmth creeping up his neck, uncomfortable with the praise. "Aircraft do speak, in their way. Most people just don't take the time to listen." "That's exactly what the Admiral said you'd say," Commander Peters smiled. "He called me last night, told me about his plans for the new division, asked me what I thought about it." Marcus blinked in surprise. "The Admiral called you?" "We served together before he made Admiral," Peters explained. "When my son told me he'd found you, I reached out to James, Admiral Thornton, immediately. Told him the Navy was wasting one of its greatest assets by keeping you hidden in a maintenance bay." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about a chance encounter with a cadet. The Admiral had been gathering information, calling in perspectives from people who had benefited from Marcus's unique abilities. This had been in motion before their meeting this morning. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for what the Admiral has in mind," Marcus admitted, lowering his voice so only the Peters men could hear. "I'm a mechanic, not an instructor or an administrator." Commander Peters shook his head firmly. "You're selling yourself short, Chief. My son isn't the only one who grew up hearing your story. Every pilot who's ever had their life saved by a maintenance miracle has shared that tale. You're already a legend, it's just that until now, no one put a face to the name." A legend. The word felt wrong, excessive, like a uniform 2 sizes too large. Marcus had never sought that kind of recognition. He'd found peace in the quiet satisfaction of problems solved, lives saved without fanfare, a job well done and then forgotten. Now they wanted to drag him into the light, pin medals on his chest, put his methods in training manuals. "I need some time to think about it," Marcus said finally. "Of course," Commander Peters nodded, understanding in his eyes. But don't think too long. The Navy needs this, Williams. Needs you. As the commander and his son departed, with promises to stay in touch, Marcus turned back to his workstation, seeking the comfort of familiar tools and machines. But even that sanctuary had changed. The other technicians watched him with new eyes, whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. The story was spreading. The miracle worker. The mechanic who could hear what machines were saying. The man who had saved countless lives without recognition, now finally being acknowledged. By midday, the whispers had grown to conversations, and the conversations had reached beyond the hangar. People Marcus had never spoken to found reasons to pass by his workstation. Officers who had previously looked through him now nodded in recognition. Senior Chief Mendoza, who had worked alongside Marcus for over a decade without ever really seeing him, now hovered nearby, as if afraid that Marcus might disappear before he could say whatever was on his mind. "Just spit it out, Mendoza," Marcus finally said, not looking up from the fuel line he was inspecting. Mendoza cleared his throat. "Is it true? About the new division? News really does travel fast around here." "So it is true," Mendoza pressed, undeterred. "Williams, that's huge. That kind of opportunity doesn't come along every day." Marcus carefully set down his tools, turning to face the senior chief. "It's not about the opportunity. It's about whether I'm the right person for it." Mendoza's expression shifted to disbelief. "Are you kidding me? Who else would it be? Everyone in this hangar knows you're the best we've got. Hell, everyone on this base knows it, even if they don't say it out loud. Knowing how to fix planes and knowing how to teach others to do it are different skills," Marcus pointed out. "You taught me," Mendoza said quietly. 10 years ago, when I was just a fresh-faced third class, you showed me how to diagnose a hydraulic leak by the sound it made. Saved my career when I caught one on Commander Riley's jet before a major inspection." Marcus remembered the incident, but he hadn't realized the impact it had had on Mendoza's career. How many others had there been like that? Small moments, forgotten by him, but transformative for the sailors he had guided. "Think about it, Williams," Mendoza continued. "How many lives have you saved? How many careers have you helped? If you could spread that knowledge, make it part of how we train everyone." He let the thought hang in the air. As Mendoza walked away, Marcus returned to his work, but his hands moved automatically while his mind churned. The comfortable anonymity he had cultivated for decades was slipping away, leaving him exposed. Yet in that exposure there was something else, a recognition not just of his skills, but of his worth as a person, as a teacher, as a leader. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. By the end of his shift, Marcus had made no decision, but the question had evolved. It was no longer whether he would accept the Admiral's offer. It was whether he could continue as he had been, now that the curtain had been pulled back. The invisible man had been seen, and there was no way to unsee him. Marcus drove home that evening with the windows down, letting the cool coastal air wash over him. The familiar route, the same one he had driven for over 2 decades, felt different somehow. The weight of the day's events pressed against his chest, not entirely unpleasant, but undeniably disruptive. He had built his life around being unseen, finding a strange comfort in his invisibility. Now, suddenly, eyes were upon him, expectations formed, a spotlight switched on that he had never sought. His apartment welcomed him with its familiar silence. It was a modest place, 1 bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen just big enough for a man who rarely cooked elaborate meals. The walls were adorned with a few photographs, his parents on their 40th anniversary, his sister and her family in Atlanta, a group shot of his division from years ago. Simple, understated, much like the man himself. Marcus moved to the refrigerator, pulled out a beer, and stepped onto the small balcony that overlooked the quiet residential street. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, barely visible, the silhouettes of Navy vessels dotted the horizon. How many of those ships carried aircraft he had worked on? How many pilots were alive today because he had heard something others missed? The questions the Admiral had raised lingered in his mind. 73 incidents. 73 potential disasters averted. Was that his legacy? A collection of catastrophes that never happened, lives saved, who would never know why they had been in danger in the first place? Marcus took a long sip of his beer, the cold liquid a momentary distraction from the churning of his thoughts. His phone rang, startling him from his reverie. The screen displayed a name he hadn't seen in years. Michael Collins. "Mike," Marcus answered, surprise evident in his voice. "Long time." "Too long, old friend," came the reply, the familiar voice carrying the slight drawl of South Carolina. "Word travels fast in the Navy, even for us retired folks." Marcus shook his head, though Collins couldn't see it. "Let me guess. You heard about Thornton's offer. Heard you were being considered for some fancy new position. About damn time, if you ask me." Michael Collins had been Marcus's closest friend during their early years in the Navy. They had served together at Pensacola before Collins had transferred to fighter pilot training and Marcus had moved to Norfolk. Collins had retired as a commander 5 years ago, after a distinguished career that included 2 combat tours and numerous commendations. "I haven't decided if I'm taking it," Marcus admitted. Collins snorted. "The hell you haven't. Of course you're taking it." "It's not that simple, Mike." "It never is with you, Mark." There was a pause, and Marcus could picture Collins shaking his head. "You remember that time in Pensacola when Chief Rodriguez was retiring and they asked for volunteers to organize his send-off?" Marcus smiled faintly at the memory. "You volunteered me. And you were furious. Said you didn't want to be in charge of anything, didn't want the attention, but you ended up organizing the best damn retirement ceremony anyone had seen because that's who you are. You step up when it matters, even if you hate every minute of being in the spotlight." Marcus leaned against the railing, watching as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon. "This is different. This isn't a one-time event, it's a permanent change. Thornton wants me to lead a division, teach others what I know. I'm not sure I even know how to explain what I do." "Then figure it out," Collins replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Because what you know, that ability to hear what the rest of us miss, that's too valuable to lose when you eventually retire. And you will retire, my friend, sooner than you think. Then what happens to all that knowledge?" It was a sobering thought. Marcus had never considered his abilities as something to be preserved or passed on. They were just part of who he was, as natural to him as breathing. But Collins was right. When he retired, that knowledge would go with him, unless he found a way to share it. "I don't know if it can be taught," Marcus said quietly. "It's not a checklist or a procedure. It's intuitive." "Then teach them intuition," Collins countered. "You weren't born knowing how to listen to engines. Someone taught you the basics and you built on that. Do the same for others." Marcus fell silent, considering his friend's words. It was true. His grandfather, a mechanic at a small airfield in Mississippi, had been the first to show him how to listen to engines, to feel the vibrations, to smell the subtle differences that could indicate problems. "Pay attention," he would say. "The machine is telling you what's wrong. You just got to learn its language." Those early lessons had formed the foundation of Marcus's approach to maintenance. "Maybe," Marcus conceded, "but there's more to it than that. This new position, it would put me in the spotlight. Every success, every failure would be noticed. Unlike now, When your successes are claimed by others and your failures, well, you don't have failures, do you? There was a knowing tone in Colin's voice. Marcus, we've known each other for 30 years. In all that time, you've been content to let others take credit for your work. You've been the ghost in the machine, the invisible man keeping planes in the air and pilots alive. But maybe it's time for you to step into the light to claim your place. I never wanted recognition, Marcus protested. No, you didn't, Collins agreed. And that's part of what makes you extraordinary. But this isn't about recognition, it's about responsibility. You have a gift, and with it comes the responsibility to share it, to use it to its fullest potential. The conversation continued for another hour. Collins pushing and prodding in the way only an old friend could. Marcus resisting and then gradually opening up about his fears, his doubts, his ingrained habit of fading into the background. By the time they said their goodbyes, Marcus felt both exhausted and oddly energized, as if some internal weight had shifted. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams filled with aircraft in flight, with faces of pilots he had never met but whose lives he had saved, with Admiral Thornton's office and the thick file of incidents averted. When dawn broke, Marcus was already awake, watching as the first light of day crept across his ceiling. His morning routine felt like a lifeline, a sequence of familiar actions in a world that had suddenly become unfamiliar: shower, shave, uniform, coffee, each step grounding him in the known, while his mind continued to grapple with the unknown that lay ahead. The drive to the base was quiet, the early hour keeping most commuters off the road. Marcus used the time to collect his thoughts, to prepare for the scrutiny he knew would await him. Yesterday had been just the beginning. Word would have spread further overnight, questions would multiply, expectations would grow. The invisible man was becoming visible, and the transition was proving more difficult than he had anticipated. As he passed through the security checkpoint, the guard, a young sailor who had never given him a second glance before, smiled and said, "Morning, Chief Williams. Admiral's looking for you." Marcus nodded his thanks, his suspicion confirmed. The spotlight was growing brighter. He found Thornton not in his office but in the hangar, examining the same FA-18 engine that Marcus had been working on the day before. The Admiral was alone, his uniform crisp in the early morning light, his attention focused entirely on the complex machinery before him. "You know," Thornton said without turning, somehow sensing Marcus's approach, "I was a pilot for 15 years before moving up the command chain. Flew everything from trainers to fighters, but I never truly understood how these things worked." He gestured toward the engine. "I knew the theory, the basic components, but the soul of it, that remained a mystery." Marcus moved to stand beside him, automatically checking the work that had been done in his absence. Most pilots don't need to understand the details. They just need to trust the aircraft will respond when they ask it to. "True," Thornton nodded. "But that trust is built on the knowledge that someone, somewhere, understands those details intimately. Someone like you." He turned to face Marcus directly. "Have you thought about my offer?" "I have, sir." "And?" Marcus hesitated, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. "I'm still considering it." Thornton studied him for a moment, then gestured toward a quiet corner of the hangar. "Walk with me, Chief." They moved away from the engine, finding a relatively private space amid the morning bustle of the maintenance crew. Thornton leaned against a workbench, his posture more casual than it had been in his office. "Let me tell you a story, Williams," he began. "When I was a young lieutenant, I was assigned to a carrier group in the Persian Gulf. One night, flying patrol, my F-14 developed a strange vibration. Nothing major, just enough to notice. All the gauges showed normal, and when I radioed back to the carrier, they told me everything was fine to continue the mission." Marcus listened, already sensing where the story was heading. But there was this chief on board. Rodriguez was his name. Hispanic guy, been in the Navy since Vietnam. He got on the radio and asked me to describe the vibration. Then he told the CAG to order me back to the carrier immediately. Thornton's eyes took on a faraway look. Turns out there was a crack in the wing spar. If I'd stayed out on patrol, the wing would have failed catastrophically. No chance of ejection, no chance of survival. Rodriguez had a good ear, Marcus observed quietly. The best, Thornton agreed. He saved my life that night and probably a dozen others during his career. But you know what happened to him? Nothing. No commendations, no promotions. He retired as a chief just like he'd been for 20 years. All that knowledge, all that experience gone when he left, and I've often wondered how many lives could have been saved if he'd been given the opportunity to share what he knew. The parallel was unmistakable, the message clear. Thornton wasn't just offering Marcus a promotion, he was offering him a chance to avoid Rodriguez's fate, to ensure that his knowledge didn't disappear when he eventually hung up his uniform. I'm not looking for an answer today, Thornton said, straightening up, but I do need one soon. The Navy moves slowly until it doesn't, and this program is gaining momentum. I'd like you to be part of it, Williams, but with or without you, it's happening. As the Admiral walked away, Marcus remained in the corner, watching as the hangar came fully to life around him. Technicians calling to each other, the whine of power tools, the metallic clang of equipment being moved, the symphony of naval aviation maintenance that had been the soundtrack to his life for decades. Could he really step away from this? Trade his tools for a desk, his direct connection to the aircraft for meetings and reports and training sessions? Yet even as he asked himself these questions, he knew the answer was forming, crystallizing within him like a decision that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. For 3 days, Marcus continued his regular duties, while the question of Thornton's offer simmered in his mind. The hangar felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of expectation. Every conversation seemed to pause when he walked by, only to resume in hushed tones once he passed. His usual sanctuary had become a stage, and he was reluctantly cast as the lead in a performance he had never auditioned for. On the 4th morning, Marcus arrived at the base earlier than usual. The pre-dawn stillness wrapped around him like a protective cloak as he made his way to Hangar 3. Inside, only the security lights illuminated the cavernous space, casting long shadows across the silent aircraft. This was how he preferred it. Peaceful, the machines at rest, waiting for his touch to bring them back to life. He moved to his workstation, setting down his thermos of coffee and running a hand along the partially disassembled engine that had been his project for the past week. The familiar textures, smooth metal, rough gaskets, the cool precision of machined parts, grounded him in a way nothing else could. This was his world, his language, his purpose. But was it enough? The question had haunted him since his conversation with Collins, growing louder with each passing day. Was it enough to save lives one aircraft at a time, when he could potentially save hundreds or thousands by sharing what he knew? Was his comfort, his preference for anonymity, worth more than that potential impact? Marcus closed his eyes, letting his hands rest on the engine. The metal felt cool beneath his palms, solid and dependable. For a moment he simply breathed, listening to the silence of the hangar, to the distant hum of the bass coming awake, to the quiet voice inside him that had been whispering the same answer for days. When he opened his eyes again, his decision was made. By 0730, the hangar was alive with activity, but Marcus was already on his way to the administration building. He had left Senior Chief Mendoza in charge of his workstation, with explicit instructions for the FA-18 engine that had occupied his attention. Now he strode purposefully across the base, his mind clear for the first time in days. Admiral Thornton's assistant, A lieutenant with a perpetually harried expression looked up in surprise as Marcus entered. "Chief Williams," she said, recognition dawning immediately. "The Admiral isn't expecting you. He's in a meeting with—" "It's all right, Lieutenant," came Thornton's voice from the doorway of his office. "I can spare a moment for Chief Williams." The Admiral gestured for Marcus to enter, dismissing the two junior officers who had been briefing him with a nod. Once they were alone, Thornton closed the door and turned to face Marcus. "I take it you've made a decision." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, standing straight, his bearing reflecting the certainty he now felt. "I'll accept the position, but I have some conditions." A smile tugged at the corner of Thornton's mouth. "Conditions? That's a bold approach for someone who's spent his career avoiding attention, Chief." "This isn't about me, sir. It's about making sure the program works." Thornton nodded, gesturing for Marcus to continue. "First," Marcus began, "I need to handpick my initial team, not based on rank or time in service, but on aptitude, the ability to hear what I hear, to feel what I feel." "That seems reasonable." "Second, I want to design the training program myself without interference from committees or bureaucracy. Once it's established and proven, we can refine it through proper channels." Thornton leaned against his desk, considering this. "That's pushing the boundaries of how things are typically done, but I can shield you from the worst of the red tape, at least initially. And third," Marcus continued, his voice firm, "I want to stay hands-on. No full-time desk job. The program would be based in the hangar, not in an office. Learning happens with hands-on engines, not in classrooms." The Admiral studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can see why you've been so effective all these years, Williams. You know exactly what you need to succeed." He extended his hand. "You have a deal, on all counts. Welcome to leadership." As they shook hands, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a different kind of pressure, the weight of the responsibility he had just accepted. He was no longer just responsible for the aircraft he personally maintained. Now he would be responsible for shaping the future of naval aviation maintenance, for preserving and passing on knowledge that had previously existed only in his mind. "When do I start?" he asked. "Officially? Next Monday. But I suggest you use the rest of this week to start identifying your team. The sooner we get this moving, the better." Marcus nodded, already mentally sorting through the technicians he had worked with over the years, considering who might have the natural aptitude he was looking for. "I'll have a list by Friday." "I have no doubt you will," Thornton said, a note of genuine respect in his voice. "One more thing, Chief, or should I say, Senior Chief." Marcus blinked, the implication taking a moment to register. "Sir?" "You can't lead a division as a Chief Petty Officer. The promotion paperwork is already processed. Congratulations, Senior Chief Williams. It's been a long time coming." The promotion was unexpected, though perhaps it shouldn't have been. Marcus had declined advancement so many times over the years that he had stopped thinking of it as a possibility. Now, in the space of a week, his entire career trajectory had changed. "Thank you, sir," he said simply, uncertain how else to respond. "Thank me by making this program a success," Thornton replied. "Now go start building your team." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Marcus divided his time between completing his current maintenance projects and quietly observing the technicians throughout the hangar. He wasn't looking for the ones with the highest evaluation scores or the cleanest uniforms. He was watching for those rare moments when someone would pause, head tilted, listening to an engine with more than just their ears, feeling the vibrations with more than just their hands. By Friday, he had identified 8 sailors, 5 petty officers, 2 chiefs, and surprisingly 1 ensign fresh from the academy who had been an aircraft mechanic before earning his commission. None of them knew they were being considered, and Marcus intended to keep it that way until official announcements were made. He wanted to observe them in their natural environment without the self-consciousness that would come from knowing they were under evaluation. Marcus submitted his list to Admiral Thornton late Friday afternoon, along with a rough outline of how he envisioned the training program working. It wasn't a formal curriculum. He wasn't an educator and had no pretensions about knowing how to structure one, but it captured the essence of his approach to aircraft maintenance, a combination of deep technical knowledge and the intuitive understanding that came from truly listening to the machines. The weekend was meant to be a time for Marcus to prepare himself for the changes ahead, but Saturday morning brought an unexpected complication. His doorbell rang at 900, startling him as he sat at his small kitchen table, reviewing technical manuals he had accumulated over the years. Opening the door, he found an unfamiliar officer standing on his threshold, a commander with the insignia of the Naval Air Systems Command on his uniform. Behind him, parked on the street, was a staff car with a driver waiting at attention. "Senior Chief Williams?" the commander asked, his tone formal. "I'm Commander Jackson Navarre. Admiral Westfield requests your presence at Norfolk Naval Station immediately." Marcus frowned. Admiral Westfield was the commander of Naval Air Forces Atlantic, several levels above Thornton in the chain of command. "May I ask what this is regarding, Commander?" "The Admiral will brief you himself, Senior Chief. The car is waiting." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself being ushered into a conference room at the Naval Station's headquarters building. The room was dominated by a long table surrounded by high-backed chairs, most of them occupied by officers ranging from lieutenant commanders to captains. At the head of the table sat a stern-faced man with 3 stars on his collar, Vice Admiral Westfield himself. "Senior Chief Williams," Westfield said, his voice clipped. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Please, take a seat." Marcus sat in the only empty chair, acutely aware that he was the only enlisted person in the room, and by far the lowest-ranking individual present. The atmosphere was tense, the officers exchanging glances that suggested a contentious discussion had been interrupted by his arrival. "Senior Chief," Westfield continued, "I understand that Admiral Thornton has offered you a position leading a new division focused on advanced diagnostic techniques and training. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, keeping his voice even despite the growing sense that something was amiss. "And you've accepted this position?" "I have, sir." Westfield nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "I see. And are you aware that such a program requires approval from Navarre and a budget allocation from Fleet Forces Command, neither of which has been secured?" Marcus felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "No, sir. Admiral Thornton didn't mention those details." A murmur ran through the assembled officers, quickly silenced by Westfield's raised hand. "Admiral Thornton has been enthusiastic about this initiative, perhaps excessively so. While his intentions are commendable, there are procedures that must be followed, processes that cannot be circumvented, even for a program with potential merit." Marcus remained silent, sensing that there was more to this meeting than a lesson in naval bureaucracy. "That said," Westfield continued, "your reputation precedes you, Senior Chief. The incidents documented in your file are impressive, if somewhat irregularly reported, which brings us to the purpose of this meeting." He leaned forward, fixing Marcus with a penetrating stare. "We need to understand exactly what it is you do, and whether it can truly be taught to others. If it can, then perhaps Thornton's program has a future, albeit through proper channels." For the next 2 hours, Marcus found himself under intense scrutiny as he attempted to explain his approach to aircraft maintenance. The officers around the table, many of them engineers or test pilots, pressed him on technical details, asked for specific examples of his diagnostic methods, challenged him to explain how he could identify problems that sophisticated computer systems missed. It was the most difficult conversation of Marcus's career. How did you explain a lifetime of listening to engines, of feeling vibrations, of smelling subtle changes in hydraulic fluids or electrical systems? How did you quantify intuition built on decades of experience? With all due respect, Senior Chief, a captain with an aerospace engineering background said skeptically, what you're describing sounds more like mysticism than maintenance. Aircraft don't talk to technicians. Not in words, sir, Marcus replied patiently, but in patterns. Every machine has a baseline, how it sounds, how it feels, how it responds. When something changes, even slightly, it creates a deviation from that pattern. Most of these deviations are too subtle for instruments to detect, at least in their early stages, but a trained human sense can pick them up. And you believe this can be taught? Another officer asked, doubt evident in his tone. To some, Marcus answered honestly. Not everyone has the aptitude, just like not everyone has the aptitude to be a pilot or a surgeon. But those who do have it can be trained to recognize these patterns, to trust their senses, to develop the intuition that comes with experience. Admiral Westfield had remained silent through most of this exchange, watching Marcus with an unreadable expression. Now, as the questions began to circle back on themselves, he raised a hand to quiet the room. Senior Chief Williams, he said, his tone measured, I appreciate your patience with this inquiry. It's clear that you possess a unique skill set that has served the Navy well, even if it hasn't been properly recognized until now. He paused, exchanging glances with several of the senior officers. I'm inclined to support Admiral Thornton's initiative, with certain modifications to ensure proper oversight and evaluation. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Whatever outcome the assembled officers had expected, it apparently wasn't this one. Admiral Westfield's stipulations were straightforward but significant. Marcus would have 6 months to prove that his methods could be taught and quantified. The program would begin with a small pilot group, the 8 people Marcus had already identified, but their progress would be rigorously documented and evaluated by a committee of engineers and officers. If, after 6 months, the results were deemed inadequate, the program would be discontinued. It's a reasonable compromise, Thornton said when Marcus briefed him on the meeting. They were walking through Hangar 3, the Sunday afternoon quiet broken only by their footsteps and the distant sound of a helicopter taking off. Westfield could have shut us down completely. That he's willing to give us a trial period is actually quite generous given the circumstances. And the circumstances are that you bypass the chain of command, Marcus observed, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. Thornton had the grace to look slightly abashed. I may have been over-enthusiastic in my approach, but I stand by the decision. Sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission, especially in a bureaucracy as entrenched as ours. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He had spent his career playing by the rules, finding ways to work within the system rather than around it. Thornton's willingness to skip steps for what he believed was right seemed both admirable and dangerous. 6 months isn't much time, he said finally, especially with the level of documentation they're requiring. Then we'd better make every day count, Thornton replied, starting tomorrow. Monday morning arrived with a sense of ceremony that made Marcus uncomfortable. The 8 sailors he had selected, Petty Officers Chen, Rodriguez, Patel, Washington, and Nguyen, Chief Petty Officers Davis and Hernandez, and Ensign Taylor, had been summoned to a briefing room adjacent to Hangar 3. None of them knew why they had been called in or what awaited them, and their expressions ranged from curious to concerned as they found their seats. Marcus stood at the front of the room, fighting the urge to retreat to the familiar comfort of his workstation. Admiral Thornton sat to one side, his presence lending an official gravity to the proceedings. At precisely 0800, Thornton stood and called the room to attention. At ease, he said after the formalities had been observed. "You're probably wondering why you've been gathered here today. Each of you has been selected for a new initiative that could change the way the Navy approaches aircraft maintenance." He gestured toward Marcus. "Senior Chief Williams will be leading this program, and he personally identified each of you as having the potential aptitude for what we'll be teaching." The sailors exchanged glances, surprise evident on their faces. Marcus could read their thoughts as clearly as if they had spoken aloud. Why us? What did we do to get noticed? And perhaps most puzzling to them, why is Chief Williams, the quiet maintenance expert who barely speaks unless spoken to, suddenly in charge? Marcus stepped forward, clearing his throat. Public speaking had never been his forte, but there was no avoiding it now. For those who don't know me well, I've been in naval aviation maintenance for nearly 3 decades. During that time, I've developed certain techniques for identifying aircraft issues before they become critical failures. Admiral Thornton has asked me to formalize these techniques into a training program, and you are the first cohort. He paused, searching for the right words. How to explain what they would be learning without sounding mystical or worse, delusional? What Senior Chief Williams is too modest to tell you, Thornton interjected, sensing Marcus's hesitation, is that his techniques have saved dozens of aircraft and lives. He can identify problems that our most sophisticated diagnostic equipment misses, often by using nothing more than his senses: hearing, touch, smell. Some call it intuition, others call it experience, but whatever it is, it works. And now we want to see if it can be taught. The room was silent, all eyes on Marcus. He took a deep breath and continued. This isn't about replacing standard maintenance procedures or diagnostic tools. It's about augmenting them, adding another layer of checks that might catch what the others miss. I can't promise all of you will develop these skills to the same degree. Some of you may find it comes naturally, others may struggle, but you've all shown moments of intuitive understanding that suggest you have the potential. Petty Officer Chen raised her hand, her expression a mix of confusion and interest. Senior Chief, with respect, how exactly did you identify us? I don't recall ever working directly with you. It was a fair question, and one Marcus had anticipated. I've been watching all of you, some for years, others more recently. Each of you has displayed moments of what I call mechanical empathy. Times when you've sensed something was wrong with an aircraft before diagnostics confirmed it, or when you've made a correct call based on something you couldn't quite explain. He turned to Chen specifically. 3 months ago, you refused to sign off on a pre-flight check for a training aircraft because, and I quote from your report, the port engine sounded off. The maintenance officer overruled you because all diagnostics showed normal function. 2 hours later, that aircraft had to make an emergency landing when the port engine experienced a partial failure. Chen's eyes widened in recognition. I remember that. Commander Ellis was furious with me for delaying the flight schedule until the plane came back. Exactly. Marcus nodded. You heard something wrong even though you couldn't pinpoint what it was. That's the kind of intuition we're looking to develop. He went around the room, recounting for each sailor a specific instance where they had demonstrated similar intuition. For some, it was a recent event. For others, like Chief Davis, it was something from years ago that Marcus had noted and remembered. With each example, the atmosphere in the room shifted, skepticism giving way to curiosity, even excitement. So what happens now? Ensign Taylor asked. He was the youngest of the group, his commission so fresh the gold bars on his collar still gleamed. Now, Marcus replied, we get to work. The program has been given 6 months to prove its effectiveness. During that time, you'll split your duties between your regular assignments and training with me. We'll start this afternoon, 1300 hours, Hangar 3, Bay 7. As the sailors filed out, their conversation animated and speculative, Thornton approached Marcus. "Good start," he said. "They're intrigued, which is half the battle. But the real test begins this afternoon when you have to start teaching them something tangible." Marcus nodded, already mentally preparing for the afternoon session. He had spent the weekend organizing his thoughts, trying to distill decades of intuitive knowledge into teachable components. It was like trying to explain how to breathe or how to recognize a face. Processes so automatic they seemed to defy explicit instruction. After lunch, Marcus arrived at Bay 7 to find all 8 sailors already waiting, their expressions eager and attentive. The bay had been set up according to his specifications: 3 different aircraft engines in various states of disassembly, a workbench with specialized tools, and a small area with chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the equipment. "I'm glad to see your enthusiasm," Marcus began once they had settled. "But before we start, I want to be clear about something. What I'm going to teach you isn't mystical or magical. It's not some special gift that only a few people have. It's a skill, developed through practice and attention, just like any other skill. The difference is that it involves using senses and awareness that most maintenance training doesn't emphasize." He moved to the first engine, a T-700 turboshaft from a Seahawk helicopter. "We'll start with sound. Every engine has its own acoustic signature, a combination of frequencies and resonances that create a unique sound profile. When something changes in that profile, it's often the first indicator of a developing problem." For the next 2 hours, Marcus had each sailor listen to the engine running at different power settings, pointing out subtle variations in the sound that indicated normal operation versus potential issues. He showed them how to use not just their ears but their entire bodies to sense vibrations, how to place their hands on different parts of the engine to feel for anomalies, how to distinguish between the normal smells of an operating engine and the early indicators of overheating components or fluid leaks. It was basic, fundamental stuff, the ABCs of mechanical intuition, but he was surprised at how quickly they absorbed the lessons. Chen, in particular, showed an immediate aptitude, correctly identifying a deliberately misaligned bearing by its sound alone. Davis and Hernandez, with their years of experience, caught on quickly as well, while the others showed varying degrees of understanding. Only Petty Officer Nguyen seemed completely at sea, his frustration evident as he struggled to discern the differences Marcus was pointing out. By the end of the session, while the others were excitedly discussing what they had learned, Nguyen hung back, his expression clouded. "Don't get discouraged," Marcus told him quietly. "It takes time. Some people's senses are naturally more attuned to certain things than others. We'll find your strength." Nguyen nodded, but the doubt remained in his eyes. "With respect, Senior Chief, I'm not sure why I was selected. I've never had any special insight about engines." "You have better spatial awareness than anyone I've ever worked with," Marcus replied. 3 weeks ago, you reassembled a fuel control unit faster than I've ever seen it done, with perfect alignment on the first try. That kind of spatial intuition is just as valuable as being able to hear a failing bearing." Surprise registered on Nguyen's face, followed by a cautious pride. "I didn't think anyone noticed that." "I notice everything in my hangar," Marcus said simply. "That's the first lesson. Pay attention to details others miss." As the days passed, the training sessions fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent on theory and fundamentals, the physics of sound propagation through metal, the chemistry of fluid degradation, the mechanics of stress fractures. Afternoons were devoted to practical application, diagnosing real maintenance issues, comparing intuitive assessments with diagnostic readouts, developing the sensory understanding that formed the core of Marcus's approach. Word spread quickly throughout the base about this special program being run out of Hangar 3. Other maintenance personnel began finding excuses to pass by Bay 7, curiosity drawing them to observe what was happening. Some were skeptical, dismissing it as voodoo maintenance or a waste of resources. Others were intrigued, even envious of the selected few who were being trained. The scrutiny intensified when, 2 weeks into the program, a delegation from Admiral Westfield's office arrived to evaluate their progress. Captain Reynolds, an aerospace engineer with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, led the evaluation team. They observed a training session, reviewed the documentation Marcus had been keeping, and interviewed each of the trainees separately. "I remain unconvinced, Senior Chief," Reynolds said afterward, his tone clipped and professional. "While I don't dispute that you personally possess exceptional diagnostic skills, the data is insufficient to determine whether these skills are genuinely being transferred to your trainees or whether they're simply becoming more attentive to details that any good maintenance technician should notice anyway." Marcus had anticipated this criticism. "Would you be open to a demonstration, Captain?" Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "What kind of demonstration?" "A practical test. Your team selects an aircraft, introduces a subtle defect that wouldn't be caught by standard diagnostics, and lets my trainees attempt to identify it. Blind test, controlled conditions." The captain considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That could provide more objective data. I'll discuss it with Admiral Westfield and get back to you." 3 days later, the test was arranged. The evaluation team had selected an FA-18 that had just completed a standard maintenance cycle and passed all diagnostic checks. Unbeknownst to Marcus and his trainees, they had introduced a defect, the nature and location of which were sealed in an envelope held by a neutral third party, a commander from the Inspector General's office who had been brought in to oversee the test. Marcus gathered his team in the hangar, where the aircraft waited. "This is our first real test," he told them quietly. "Remember what we've practiced. Use all your senses, trust your intuition, but verify your findings." They approached the aircraft methodically, working in pairs as Marcus had taught them. Chen and Rodriguez took the left side, Davis and Hernandez the right, Washington and Taylor the cockpit, while Patel and Nguyen focused on the undercarriage. Marcus observed but did not participate, aware of the evaluation team watching their every move. 30 minutes into the inspection, Petty Officer Washington called Marcus over to the cockpit. "Senior Chief, something isn't right with the environmental control system," he said, his voice low but confident. "There's a vibration when the auxiliary power unit is running that shouldn't be there, and a smell. Not quite electrical, not quite hydraulic." Marcus leaned into the cockpit, checking Washington's observation without confirming or denying it. "What do you think is causing it?" Washington hesitated, then committed. "If I had to guess, there's a misalignment in the bleed air valve assembly. It's causing air to leak past the seal, creating the vibration and the smell." Marcus nodded non-committally and moved away, allowing Washington and Taylor to continue their inspection. One by one, the other pairs reported their findings, or lack thereof, until all had completed their checks. Then Marcus gathered them out of earshot of the evaluation team. "Opinions?" he asked simply. A brief discussion ensued, with Washington defending his assessment against mild skepticism from the others who had found nothing unusual. In the end, the group consensus supported Washington's diagnosis. Marcus approached Captain Reynolds. "My team believes there is a misalignment in the bleed air valve assembly of the environmental control system, causing a minor air leak past the seal." Reynolds's expression revealed nothing as he turned to the commander from the IG's office. "Please open the envelope." The commander broke the seal and read aloud, "A 0.3 millimeter misalignment has been introduced to the bleed air valve in the environmental control system, creating a minor but progressive air leak that would not trigger warning systems but could potentially lead to system failure over time." A murmur ran through the evaluation team, and something almost like respect flickered in Reynolds's eyes. "A correct identification, Senior Chief. Impressive, but still just one test." "The first of many," Marcus replied, keeping his tone neutral despite the surge of pride he felt for his team. "We're just getting started." As they walked away from the aircraft, Petty Officer Washington couldn't contain a grin. "Did you see their faces, Senior Chief? They didn't think we could do it." "Don't get cocky," Marcus warned, though there was no real admonishment in his tone. "This was just the beginning. The real work is still ahead of us." But as he watched his team head back to Base 7, energized by their success, Marcus allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Perhaps this impossible task wasn't so impossible after all. Perhaps his knowledge could be passed on, his intuition taught, his experience multiplied through others. Perhaps after decades of working alone, he had finally found a way to leave a legacy beyond the invisible saves only he knew about. The successful identification of the bleed air valve misalignment earned Marcus's program a measure of credibility with Captain Reynolds and his evaluation team, but it was just a single test, a promising start but far from sufficient to secure the program's future. As the days turned into weeks, the training continued with increasing intensity. The initial excitement gave way to the hard reality of transforming intuition into teachable methodology. "Again," Marcus instructed, his voice firm but patient, as Petty Officer Nguyen struggled to identify the subtle harmonic irregularity in a running APU. "Close your eyes. Don't try to analyze the sound, feel it, let your body tell you what's changed." Nguyen's frustration was evident, a sheen of sweat on his forehead as he concentrated. "I'm sorry, Senior Chief. They all sound the same to me." Marcus had been expecting this, the plateau that inevitably came when enthusiasm collided with difficulty. Each of his trainees was experiencing it in different ways. Chen had hit her wall with vibration sensing, Washington with fluid diagnostics, Taylor with the subtle variations in metal fatigue. Even Davis and Hernandez, with all their experience, found themselves challenged by aspects of the training that fell outside their customary expertise. "Take a break," Marcus told Nguyen. "We'll try a different approach later." As Nguyen stepped away, Chief Davis approached, concern etched on his weathered face. "He's taking it hard, Senior Chief. Thinks he's letting the team down." Marcus nodded, watching as Nguyen sat alone at the edge of the bay, staring at his hands. He expected too much too soon. They all did. "We all did," Davis corrected gently. "After that first test with the FA-18, everyone thought this would be easier, that we'd be miracle workers by the end of the month." It was true. That early success had created expectations that the subsequent weeks had failed to meet. The reality of learning what Marcus knew, truly learning it, not just mimicking it, was proving more challenging than any of them had anticipated. The human senses weren't easily calibrated, and intuition couldn't be programmed like software. It required thousands of hours of experience, countless exposures to different conditions, and a natural aptitude that varied widely among individuals. "I need to recalibrate their expectations," Marcus said, more to himself than to Davis, "and maybe my own as well." That evening, after the others had left, Marcus remained in Bay 7, surrounded by the engines and components that had been his silent companions for so long. In the quiet, he could admit what he had been reluctant to acknowledge. Teaching was harder than doing. Much harder. Translating what came naturally to him into steps others could follow was like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen. His phone buzzed. A text from Admiral Thornton. "Monthly review tomorrow 0900. Westfield will be there. Progress report." Marcus stared at the message, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The monthly review was the first major evaluation point for the program. Westfield would be looking for concrete evidence that the training was working, that the resources being allocated were producing measurable results. What could Marcus show him? A single successful test in a collection of trainees still struggling with the basics. He didn't reply immediately, instead walking slowly around the bay, his fingers trailing over the equipment. Each piece seemed to speak to him, the worn spots where thousands of hands had touched, the subtle discolorations that told stories of heat and pressure, the microscopic cracks that whispered of stress and fatigue. This was his language, the dialect he spoke fluently after decades of conversation with machines. How could he translate that into terms others could understand? A noise at the entrance to the bay interrupted his thoughts. Ensign Taylor stood there, looking uncertain whether to enter. "Something I can help you with, Ensign?" Marcus asked. Taylor stepped into the bay, his uniform immaculate despite the late hour. "I was hoping to get some extra time with the T-700, Senior Chief. I'm still not catching the compressor blade harmonic you pointed out this morning." Marcus studied the young officer, noting the determination in his eyes. Taylor had been an unexpected addition to the team, a commissioned officer assigned to a program where enlisted expertise was the currency. He had approached the training with humility and diligence, but like the others, he was hitting walls. "It's almost 2100, Ensign. You've been at this since 0600. "I know, Senior Chief, but I can't let this beat me." There was something in Taylor's voice, a resolve that resonated with Marcus's own experience from decades ago. Marcus made a decision. "All right, but we're going to try something different." He led Taylor to a small tool cabinet in the corner of the bay, unlocking it with a key he kept on his chain. Inside, carefully organized, were tools unlike the standard issue equipment found throughout the hangar, specialized instruments that Marcus had collected or modified over the years, each with a specific purpose that only he fully understood. "These aren't standard issue," Marcus explained, selecting a slender rod-like device with a rubberized handle. "I've been developing and refining them for years. This one amplifies vibrations and translates them into tactile feedback. It won't tell you what's wrong, but it might help you feel what I feel." He handed the tool to Taylor, who examined it with curiosity. "Did you make this yourself, Senior Chief?" "Modified it from a medical instrument," Marcus replied. "Doctors use something similar to detect abnormalities in circulation. I adapted it for metallic vibration patterns." Taylor's eyes widened. "You've been creating your own diagnostic tools all these years?" "When necessary," Marcus said simply. "The standard tools don't always capture what I need them to." This was another aspect of his work that Marcus had never formally documented, the specialized tools and techniques he had developed to extend his natural senses. Some were simple modifications of existing equipment, others were entirely custom creations, born of necessity and ingenuity. For the next hour, Marcus guided Taylor through the use of the vibration amplifier, showing him how to place it against different parts of the engine to detect variations in the harmonic pattern. Slowly, the young officer began to recognize what Marcus had been trying to describe, the subtle difference between a properly seated compressor blade and one that was minutely misaligned. "I feel it," Taylor said finally, his face lighting up with genuine understanding. "It's like a hiccup in the rhythm, so subtle, but once you feel it, it's unmistakable." "Exactly," Marcus nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "That's exactly it." As they shut down the equipment for the night, Taylor hesitated, then asked, "Senior Chief, why haven't you shown us these tools before? They could help the others who are struggling, like Nguyen." The question caught Marcus off guard. Why hadn't he shared his custom tools? They were his personal equipment, developed through years of trial and error. But there was no logical reason to withhold them from the training program. Was it possible that subconsciously he had been holding back, keeping some part of his knowledge to himself? "I'll bring them in tomorrow," Marcus decided. "You're right. They should be part of the program. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the review meeting with a clear plan in mind. The conference room was filled with senior officers, including Admiral Westfield and Captain Reynolds. Admiral Thornton sat to one side, his expression encouraging but concerned. They all knew the stakes. 6 months to prove the program's value, with the first month already gone. "Senior Chief Williams," Admiral Westfield began once the formalities were concluded, "please update us on the progress of your training program." Marcus stood, aware of all eyes on him. Instead of the formal presentation they were expecting, he placed a worn leather tool roll on the conference table and carefully opened it, revealing the collection of specialized instruments he had brought from his personal cabinet. "Admirals, captains, with respect, I believe I've been approaching this training program incorrectly," he began. "I've been trying to teach my trainees to hear what I hear and feel what I feel without giving them the tools that have helped me develop those abilities." He gestured to the tools before him. "These are instruments I've modified or created over the years to extend and refine my diagnostic capabilities. They're not standard issue, and they're not documented in any maintenance manual. They represent decades of problem-solving and innovation that I've kept largely to myself." A murmur ran through the assembled officers. Captain Reynolds leaned forward, examining the tools with undisguised interest. "You developed these yourself, Senior Chief?" "Yes, sir. When standard equipment couldn't detect what I needed to detect, I adapted." Admiral Westfield's expression was unreadable. "And you believe these custom tools are the key to transferring your skills to others?" "Not the entire key, sir, but an important part that I've been overlooking," Marcus replied. "Last night, Ensign Taylor was able to detect a compressor blade harmonic irregularity using one of these tools that he hadn't been able to identify with standard methods. It was a breakthrough moment that made me realize what's been missing from our approach." He took a deep breath, then continued with the proposal he had formulated during a sleepless night. "I'm requesting a 2-week pause in the regular training schedule to document these tools, their applications, and the methodology behind them. I believe this will significantly enhance our ability to standardize the intuitive aspects of advanced diagnostics." The room fell silent as the officers considered his request. A pause in training would push their timeline even tighter, leaving less room for error in an already precarious schedule. But the potential benefit was clear. If Marcus's custom tools could bridge the gap between his exceptional abilities and standard training methods, they might represent the breakthrough the program needed. Admiral Westfield turned to Captain Reynolds. "Your assessment, Captain." Reynolds studied the tools on the table, then looked at Marcus with newfound respect. "I believe Senior Chief Williams has identified a critical gap in our approach. These tools represent a tangible link between standard maintenance procedures and the advanced diagnostic capabilities we're trying to develop. Documenting them properly could be invaluable." Westfield considered this, then nodded slowly. 2 weeks, Senior Chief. But I want daily progress reports, and I expect this documentation to be thorough enough for engineering review." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "Thank you, sir." As the meeting adjourned, Admiral Thornton approached Marcus, eyeing the tool roll with curiosity. "All these years, and I had no idea you were creating your own equipment. Why keep it to yourself?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "It wasn't intentional, sir. These tools evolved gradually, almost like extensions of myself. I didn't think of them as separate innovations that others might use." "Well, they might just save our program," Thornton said. "But next time you're sitting on a gold mine of untapped knowledge, maybe mention it earlier." There was humor in his tone, but also a gentle rebuke. Marcus nodded, accepting the criticism. "Yes, sir. I'm still learning how to be a teacher instead of just a practitioner." Back in Bay 7, Marcus gathered his team and explained the shift in their training schedule. He laid out his custom tools on a workbench, watching as their expressions shifted from curiosity to amazement as he demonstrated each one's purpose and function. For the next 2 weeks, we'll be documenting these tools and integrating them into our training methodology, he explained. Each of you will work with different instruments, learning their applications and helping to standardize their use. Petty Officer Nguyen picked up the vibration amplifier, turning it over in his hands with a look of wonder. You made these, Senior Chief? All of them? Adapted most of them, Marcus corrected. Created a few from scratch when nothing suitable existed. This changes everything, Chief Hernandez said, testing the weight of a specialized acoustic resonator. With tools like these, we can bridge the gap between what you can sense naturally and what we're still learning to detect. Marcus watched them explore the equipment, their excitement palpable. For the first time, he felt a genuine confidence in the program's potential. The tools weren't a shortcut. They still required skill and judgment to use effectively, but they provided a concrete methodology that could be taught, replicated, and refined. As the team dispersed to begin their new assignments, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had been trying to teach others to be him, when what he should have been doing was teaching them to use what he had created. The distinction was subtle but crucial, and might just be the key to the program's success. That night, as Marcus added the day's developments to his program log, he reflected on the unexpected turn events had taken. What had begun as a personal challenge, teaching others to hear what he heard, had evolved into something broader and potentially more significant: the standardization of advanced diagnostic techniques that could be applied across naval aviation maintenance. The 2-week documentation phase transformed Base 7 from a training space into something resembling a research and development laboratory. Workbenches that had previously held engine components now displayed Marcus's collection of specialized tools, each station dedicated to understanding, testing, and documenting a different instrument. The walls were covered with diagrams, photographs, and detailed notes as the team worked to capture decades of intuitive knowledge in standardized formats. Marcus moved between the stations, guiding his trainees through the nuances of each tool's application. For the first time since the program began, he felt truly in his element, not just demonstrating techniques, but explaining the thinking behind them, the problems each tool was designed to solve, the limitations they still presented. This wasn't just maintenance anymore. It was innovation, the formalization of a methodology that had previously existed only in his mind. The key is understanding that these tools don't replace your senses, he explained to Chen and Rodriguez as they calibrated an acoustic resonator. They amplify them, extend them beyond normal human limits, but you still need to develop the intuition to interpret what they're telling you. Chen nodded, making a careful adjustment to the instrument. It's like learning a new language. The tools give us the vocabulary, but we still need to understand the grammar, how different signals relate to each other. Exactly, Marcus agreed, pleased with her insight. And like any language, fluency only comes with practice. Across the bay, Nguyen was working with a digital pressure variance detector, one of Marcus's more sophisticated creations. The young petty officer had been struggling with the tactile aspects of diagnostics, but his precise, methodical approach made him ideal for the more technical instruments that required careful setup and interpretation. "Senior Chief," Nguyen called, "I've been comparing the readings from your detector against the standard pressure gauges. There's a consistent variance that I can't account for in the documentation." Marcus joined him, examining the readings. That's intentional. The standard gauges measure absolute pressure at specific points. This detector is calibrated to capture fluctuations between points, the pressure wave as it moves through the system. Understanding dawned on Nguyen's face. So it's not measuring what the standard gauges miss, it's measuring something different entirely. Now you're getting it, Marcus said, allowing himself a small smile. Many of these tools aren't redundant systems, they're complementary ones, designed to capture aspects of performance that standard diagnostics don't even look for. For Nguyen, it was a breakthrough moment, the realization that he didn't need to replicate Marcus's innate abilities to be effective. The tools provided an alternative path to the same diagnostic insights, one that played to his own strengths in technical precision and data analysis. Similar revelations were occurring throughout the Bay as each team member found their niche within the new methodology. Davis and Hernandez excelled at integrating the specialized tools with standard maintenance procedures, creating workflows that maintained regulatory compliance while incorporating the enhanced diagnostics. Washington discovered a talent for simplifying complex techniques into teachable steps, while Taylor's engineering background proved invaluable in documenting the theoretical principles underlying each tool's function. By the end of the first week, they had compiled comprehensive documentation for 5 of Marcus's primary diagnostic instruments. Each manual included technical specifications, operating procedures, maintenance requirements, and case studies demonstrating applications in real-world scenarios. More importantly, they had begun developing a standardized training approach that didn't require Marcus's unique sensory abilities as a prerequisite. Admiral Thornton visited frequently, his initial concern giving way to cautious optimism as he reviewed their progress. "This is impressive work, Senior Chief," he commented after examining the documentation for the vibration amplifier. "Far more thorough than I anticipated in such a short time." "The team has exceeded my expectations, sir," Marcus replied, watching as his trainees continued their work with newfound confidence. Once they understood the purpose behind each tool, they brought perspectives I hadn't considered. "That's the benefit of fresh eyes," Thornton observed. "They're seeing possibilities you might have overlooked precisely because you're so familiar with these instruments." It was true. Marcus had created or modified these tools to solve specific problems he encountered, but his trainees were finding applications beyond his original intent. Chen had discovered that the acoustic resonator could detect subtle anomalies in hydraulic systems when used in a different frequency range than Marcus typically employed. Taylor had theorized that the vibration amplifier could be adapted for non-destructive testing of composite materials, potentially identifying delamination before it became visible. "We're no longer just documenting my methods," Marcus told Thornton. "We're expanding them." The Admiral smiled, genuine approval in his expression. "That's how progress happens, Williams. One generation builds on the foundation laid by the one before. That's the legacy you're creating here, not just passing on what you know, but enabling others to go beyond it." The concept of legacy had never factored into Marcus's thinking before. He had been content to do his job, solve problems as they arose, save aircraft and lives without seeking recognition. But now, watching his team develop and extend his methodologies, he began to see the potential for something that would outlast his career, perhaps his lifetime. It was both humbling and inspiring. As the second week of documentation drew to a close, Marcus prepared for their return to active training and the next phase of evaluation. Admiral Westfield had scheduled a comprehensive review for the following Monday, where Marcus would present their documentation and demonstrate the integration of the specialized tools into the training program. But the real test would come after that, another practical evaluation, this one more challenging than the FA-18 inspection that had given them their first victory. The weekend before the review, Marcus found himself in an unusual position, taking a day off. After working 14-hour days for the past 2 weeks, he had reluctantly agreed to Thornton's insistence that he rest before the critical week ahead. The Admiral had been blunt. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion, Senior Chief. Take Saturday off. That's an order." So here he was, sitting on the small balcony of his apartment, watching as the morning sun glinted off the waters of the Chesapeake Bay in the distance. The forced inactivity felt strange, almost uncomfortable after the intense focus of the past weeks. His mind kept drifting back to Bay 7, to the documentation still to be completed, to the preparations for Monday's presentation. A knock at his door interrupted these thoughts. Puzzled, he rarely received visitors. Marcus opened it to find Cadet Peters standing in the hallway, his posture straight, but his expression uncertain. "Cadet Peters," Marcus said, surprised. "What brings you here?" "I hope I'm not intruding, Senior Chief," Peters replied. "Admiral Thornton gave me your address. I wanted to talk to you before I ship out for training." Marcus stepped aside, inviting the young man in. "Ship out? I thought you were stationed at Norfolk for at least another month." "There's been a change in my orders, sir. I'm leaving for flight school on Monday, accelerated track based on my academic performance." "Congratulations," Marcus said, genuinely pleased for the young man. "Your father must be proud." A smile lit up Peter's face. "He is, and that's partly why I wanted to see you." He hesitated, then continued with the earnest directness of youth. "I wanted to thank you properly, not just for saving my dad's life all those years ago, but for what you're doing now with this training program." Marcus shook his head slightly. "No thanks necessary, Cadet. I was just doing my job." "With respect, sir, that's not true, and we both know it." Peter's voice was firm, his gaze steady. "What you did went beyond your job description. And now, because of you, people like my dad might have an even better chance of coming home to their families." The sincerity in the young man's voice caught Marcus off guard. He had spent so long focusing on the technical aspects of the program, the documentation, the tools, the training methodologies, that he had almost lost sight of the human impact, the lives that might be saved because of their work. "I brought you something," Peters continued, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small object and handed it to Marcus. "It's not much, but it's important to me." Marcus looked down at a worn silver coin, about the size of a $50. One side bore the insignia of Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542, the Flying Tigers, Peters' father's old unit. "It's a challenge coin," Peters explained. "My dad gave it to me when I was 10, told me the story of how you saved his life, said as long as I kept it with me, I'd always have a guardian angel watching over me." He smiled. "I figured now that I'm heading to flight school, maybe it should go back to the actual guardian angel." Marcus stared at the coin, momentarily at a loss for words. In all his years of service, through all the aircraft he had kept flying and the potential disasters he had averted, he had never received such a personal acknowledgement of his impact. Commendations and medals recognized duty performed, but this recognized lives changed. "I can't accept this," he said finally, trying to hand the coin back. "It belongs with you, especially now that you're following in your father's footsteps." Peter shook his head. "I've got my dad, Senior Chief, and thanks to you, a lot of other pilots might get to go home to their families too. Please keep it, as a reminder of why what you're doing matters so much." After Peters left, Marcus sat for a long time, turning the challenge coin over in his fingers, feeling the weight of it. Not just the physical heft of the silver, but the weight of what it represented. All those years of working in the shadows, of being the invisible man keeping planes in the air and pilots alive, had left their mark not just on him, but on countless others. People like Commander Peters and his son, whose lives had been shaped by moments Marcus had almost forgotten. The realization both humbled and strengthened him. As he prepared for the week ahead, for Admiral Westfield's review, for the continuation of the training program, for the practical evaluation that would further test their progress, he found himself motivated by something beyond professional pride or the desire to prove the program's worth. This was about legacy in its truest sense. The lives saved, the knowledge passed on, the impact that would continue long after he was gone. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and a brisk wind off the bay. Marcus reached the base early, the challenge coin tucked securely in his pocket, a tangible reminder of why their work mattered. Base 7 was already bustling with activity as his team made final preparations for Admiral Westfield's review. The documentation was arranged neatly on the central table, the specialized tools displayed with military precision, each station prepared to demonstrate a different aspect of the enhanced diagnostic methodology. "Everything's ready, Senior Chief," Chief Davis reported, his usual gruff demeanor softened by evident pride in their work. "The team stayed late yesterday to make sure we didn't miss anything." Marcus nodded his approval, touched by their dedication. "Thank you, Chief. Let's do a final check of the vibration demonstration. That's likely to be of particular interest to the engineering officers." As they moved through the bay, reviewing each station, Marcus was struck by how much had changed in just a few short weeks. What had begun as a nebulous attempt to teach intuitive skills had evolved into a structured methodology, complete with specialized tools and standardized procedures. His trainees, once uncertain of their role in this experimental program, now moved with purpose and confidence, each having found their place within the new paradigm they were helping to create. At precisely 0900, the doors to Base 7 opened, and Admiral Westfield entered, accompanied by Captain Reynolds and a contingent of officers Marcus didn't recognize. Their uniforms and insignia indicated they were from Naval Air Systems Command, engineers and program managers whose approval would be crucial for the long-term viability of the training initiative. "Senior Chief Williams," Westfield greeted him with a formality that betrayed nothing of his thoughts. "I understand you have quite a presentation prepared for us." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, equally formal. "If you and your team would follow me, we'll begin with an overview of the documentation we've developed." For the next 2 hours, Marcus and his trainees led the visitors through a comprehensive review of their work. Each team member presented the section they had been responsible for documenting, demonstrating the specialized tools and explaining their applications in real-world maintenance scenarios. Marcus observed with quiet pride as his trainees fielded questions with growing confidence, their knowledge no longer just borrowed from him, but genuinely their own. The Navarre engineers were particularly engaged, their initial skepticism giving way to professional curiosity as they examined the custom tools and their documentation. One commander, a propulsion specialist based on his insignia, spent nearly 30 minutes discussing the acoustic resonator with Chen, their conversation becoming increasingly technical as they explored its potential applications beyond Marcus's original design. "This is remarkably thorough work for just 2 weeks," Captain Reynolds commented as he reviewed the training protocols Taylor had developed. "The integration with standard maintenance procedures is particularly well considered." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied. The goal was to create a system that complements rather than replaces existing protocols, enhancing diagnostic capabilities without disrupting established safety measures. As the presentation concluded, Admiral Westfield gathered his team for a brief private consultation. Marcus and his trainees waited, the tension palpable despite their confidence in what they had accomplished. This review would determine whether they could proceed with the expanded training program or whether the initiative would be curtailed, perhaps even terminated. After what seemed like an eternity but was in reality only 10 minutes, Admiral Westfield and his team returned to Base 7. The Admiral's expression remained neutral as he approached Marcus, but there was something different in his bearing, a subtle shift that Marcus, trained to notice the smallest changes in machinery, couldn't help but detect in the man. "Senior Chief Williams," Westfield began, his voice carrying throughout the now silent bay, "I want to be candid about what I expected to find today." He paused, glancing around at the documentation and specialized tools arrayed throughout the space. I expected to see a well-intentioned but ultimately impractical attempt to formalize what is essentially an intuitive skill. I expected to conclude that while your personal abilities are extraordinary, they cannot be meaningfully transferred to others within the constraints of naval training programs. Marcus felt his team tense around him, preparing for disappointment. But Westfield wasn't finished. Instead, the Admiral continued, "What I've seen today represents one of the most innovative approaches to maintenance training I've encountered in my 30 years of service. You and your team have not merely documented techniques. You've created a methodological bridge between intuitive diagnostic skills and standardized procedures, a bridge that could significantly enhance aviation safety throughout the fleet." The relief in the bay was palpable, though Marcus maintained his composure, waiting for the other shoe to drop. In his experience, praise from flag officers was often followed by a "but" that changed everything. "That said," Westfield added, confirming Marcus's suspicion, "documentation and demonstration in controlled conditions are only the first steps. Before I can fully endorse this program for fleet-wide implementation, I need to see your methodology tested under more challenging circumstances, conditions that more closely approximate the real-world scenarios where these skills would be most valuable." "What kind of test did you have in mind, sir?" Marcus asked. Westfield turned to Captain Reynolds, who stepped forward with a folder in hand. "We've arranged for a practical evaluation that will push your team beyond the controlled environment of this bay," Reynolds explained. 3 days from now, a carrier air wing will be conducting pre-deployment readiness exercises off the Virginia coast. 6 aircraft from that wing have been selected for your team to evaluate, aircraft that our own maintenance personnel have already cleared for operations. Marcus understood immediately what this meant. Unlike their previous test with a single FA-18 in a hangar, they would be boarding an aircraft carrier at sea, evaluating multiple planes that were actively engaged in operational exercises. The pressure would be immense, the conditions far from ideal, and the scrutiny from the carrier's maintenance personnel guaranteed to be intense. "You'll have limited time with each aircraft," Reynolds continued. "Your team will need to apply your enhanced diagnostic methods efficiently and accurately, identifying any issues that standard maintenance protocols might have missed." "And if we don't find anything?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Reynolds exchanged a glance with Westfield before responding. "Senior Chief, I think we both know that no aircraft is perfect, especially during intensive operations. If standard maintenance has missed something, even something minor, your team should be able to find it. If they can't..." He left the implication hanging. Marcus nodded, understanding the stakes. And this wasn't just a test. It was a trial by fire. Succeed, and their program would gain the credibility needed for fleet-wide implementation. Fail, and all their work might be dismissed as interesting but ultimately impractical for real-world application. "We'll be ready, sir," he said simply. As the officers departed, Marcus gathered his team, their expressions ranging from excitement to apprehension. "Well, you heard the Admiral," he began. "We've got 3 days to prepare for carrier operations. This won't be like working in the hangar. Space is tight, time is limited, and we'll be surrounded by maintenance crews who may not appreciate outsiders questioning their work. Not to mention, we'll be on a moving ship," Nguyen added, his face slightly pale at the prospect. Marcus remembered that the young petty officer had mentioned a tendency towards seasickness during his initial interview. "We'll get you some patches for that," Marcus assured him. "But yes, stable platforms will be a luxury we won't have. That means we need to adapt our techniques for shipboard conditions." For the next 3 days, Bay 7 transformed once again, this time into a simulation of carrier maintenance conditions. Marcus arranged for the installation of a motion platform under one of their test engines, creating an approximation of the constant movement they would experience at sea. They practiced using their specialized tools in cramped spaces, developed abbreviated diagnostic routines that could be completed within the tight time constraints they would face, and rehearsed communicating their findings diplomatically to potentially resistant maintenance crews. The team worked with a renewed intensity, aware that this evaluation would determine not just the future of their program, but potentially the future of naval aviation maintenance. Each brought their unique strengths to the preparation. Chen's acute sensitivity to acoustic anomalies, Davis and Hernandez's years of experience with shipboard operations, Washington's methodical thoroughness, Taylor's engineering perspective, Patel's talent for rapid diagnosis, Rodriguez's diplomatic skills, and Nguyen's meticulous documentation. On the morning of their departure, Admiral Thornton visited Bay 7 to see them off. "I've arranged for a KOD flight to take you out to the carrier," he told Marcus. "The USS Eisenhower is conducting exercises about 100 miles offshore. You'll have approximately 6 hours on board, not a lot of time for 6 aircraft." "We'll make it work, sir," Marcus assured him, though privately he was calculating the tight margins they would be operating under. An hour per aircraft would have been challenging enough. Less than that would require perfect execution from every team member. "I know you will, Senior Chief," Thornton replied. "This program means a lot to both of us now. It's not just about proving a point anymore. It's about making a real difference in how we maintain our aircraft." He hesitated, then added, "I've been authorized to tell you that if this evaluation goes well, NAVAIR is prepared to fast-track the program for implementation across all fleet maintenance operations. Your methods could become standard procedure throughout naval aviation within a year." The revelation sent a jolt through Marcus. What had begun as a personal challenge, teaching others to hear what he heard, had grown into something with potential fleet-wide impact. The Invisible Man, who had spent decades working in the shadows, could leave a legacy that would transform naval maintenance for generations. "We won't let you down, sir," he said, the weight of the challenge settling on his shoulders. The flight to the USS Eisenhower was a cramped, noisy affair aboard a C-2 Greyhound, the Navy's carrier onboard delivery aircraft. Marcus's team sat in web seating along the sides of the cargo compartment, each lost in their own thoughts as they prepared mentally for the task ahead. Marcus himself closed his eyes, visualizing the procedures they had practiced, anticipating the challenges they might face. The challenge coin Cadet Peters had given him was in his pocket, a tangible reminder of why their work mattered. The arrested landing on the carrier deck, a controlled crash by any civilian standard, jolted everyone back to full alertness. As the rear ramp of the Greyhound lowered, revealing the organized chaos of flight operations on the massive deck, Marcus saw his team straighten, professional focus replacing nervous anticipation. They were ready. A deck officer met them at the aircraft, escorting them below decks to a briefing room where Captain Hayes, the carrier's air boss, waited. Hayes was a tall, lean officer with the intense gaze of someone responsible for coordinating hundreds of aircraft movements on a floating city. "Senior Chief Williams," he greeted Marcus, his tone professionally neutral. "Welcome aboard. I understand Admiral Westfield has arranged for you to examine some of my aircraft. There was just enough emphasis on my to make his position clear. These were his planes, operating on his schedule, and any interference would not be welcome." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, matching the captain's professional tone. "We appreciate the opportunity and will work to minimize any impact on your operations." Hayes nodded curtly. 6 aircraft have been designated for your evaluation. Each will be available only during its scheduled maintenance window. No extensions, no matter what you find. Your team will be escorted at all times by members of our maintenance division. Any issues you identify must be verified by our personnel before being logged officially. The conditions were restrictive, but not unexpected. Marcus had operated in territorial maintenance environments before and understood the protective instincts of officers responsible for aircraft readiness. "Understood, sir." My team is prepared to work within those parameters. Hayes studied Marcus for a moment, then his expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, Senior Chief, I've heard about your methods from some of my senior maintenance folks. A few of them trained under you at Norfolk years ago. They speak highly of your abilities. It wasn't quite an endorsement, but it was at least an acknowledgement that Marcus wasn't being viewed as a complete outsider. Thank you, sir. I hope we can live up to that reputation today. The first aircraft assigned for their evaluation was an FA-18E Super Hornet that had just returned from a morning sortie. As they approached the maintenance bay where it was being serviced, Marcus could see the regular maintenance crew eyeing them with undisguised skepticism, the universal look of professionals who disliked having outsiders examine their work. Remember, Marcus told his team quietly, we're not here to criticize or second-guess. We're here to demonstrate how our methods can complement standard procedures. Be respectful, be thorough, and be absolutely certain before you flag anything. They split into their practice pairs, Chen and Rodriguez taking the port side, Davis and Hernandez the starboard, Washington and Taylor the cockpit and avionics, Patel and Nguyen the undercarriage and hydraulics. Marcus himself moved between the groups, observing but not directing, allowing his trainees to apply what they had learned without interference. The specialized tools they had documented and refined over the past weeks were now deployed in a real operational environment, the acoustic resonator detecting subtle harmonic irregularities in the engines, the vibration amplifier identifying minute discrepancies in rotating components, the thermal variance detector picking up hotspots invisible to standard temperature gauges. 20 minutes into their inspection, Chen called Marcus over to the port engine intake. Senior Chief, I'm getting an unusual acoustic pattern from the compressor section, she said quietly, her expression serious but composed. It's subtle, but consistent with early-stage blade deformation. Marcus listened with his own trained ear, then nodded. Good catch. Have Rodriguez verify with the spectrum analyzer. Rodriguez applied their most sophisticated tool, a custom-modified acoustic spectrum analyzer that could detect patterns invisible to standard engine diagnostics. His findings confirmed Chen's assessment. Definitely abnormal harmonics in the N2 range, he reported, consistent with a micro-deformation in one or more compressor blades. Marcus turned to the carrier's maintenance chief, who had been watching their work with growing interest despite his initial skepticism. Chief, we're detecting what appears to be early-stage blade deformation in the port engine compressor. It's not critical yet, but left unaddressed, it could develop into a serious issue during high-stress operations. The maintenance chief frowned. That engine passed all standard diagnostics this morning. I'm sure it did, Marcus replied, careful to keep any hint of superiority from his tone. The deformation is too subtle for standard tests to detect, but it's there. For a moment, the chief seemed ready to dismiss their finding. Then his expression shifted, professional curiosity overcoming territorial instinct. Show me. Marcus handed him the acoustic resonator, guiding him through the proper placement and what to listen for. It took several attempts, but finally, the chief's eyes widened in recognition. Son of a... I hear it now, like a slight flutter in the normal rhythm. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Your diagnostics would probably catch it in another 50 flight hours, but by then the deformation would be more significant, possibly requiring a complete engine replacement rather than a simpler blade adjustment. The chief handed back the resonator, a new respect in his eyes. I'll have my team pull the engine for inspection. If you're right. He let the sentence hang, but the implication was clear. If they were right about this, their credibility would be established, at least with this maintenance crew. Similar scenes played out across the other 5 aircraft they inspected over the next few hours. Not every inspection yielded findings. 2 of the planes were genuinely in excellent condition, but in each case, Marcus's team applied their enhanced diagnostic methods thoroughly and professionally, earning grudging respect from the carrier's maintenance personnel. The final aircraft they were scheduled to inspect was an EA-18G Growler, the electronic warfare variant of the Super Hornet. As Marcus's team approached the maintenance bay, where it was being prepared for an afternoon mission, there was a noticeable shift in how they were received. Word had spread throughout the carrier's maintenance division about their earlier findings, particularly the compressor blade deformation that had been confirmed when the engine was pulled for inspection. The skepticism that had greeted their arrival had transformed into cautious respect, even curiosity. "Your team's got quite a reputation already, Senior Chief," commented the Growler's maintenance officer, a lieutenant with over 15 years of experience. "They're saying you can hear problems before they happen." "Not quite that mystical, sir," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "We just listen a little differently." The inspection proceeded with the same methodical thoroughness they had applied to the previous aircraft. As they worked, Marcus noticed that the carrier's maintenance personnel were no longer just observing. They were asking questions, watching the specialized tools in action, taking notes on the techniques being demonstrated. What had begun as an evaluation was evolving into an impromptu training session. 40 minutes into the inspection, Washington called Marcus over to the avionics bay. "Senior Chief, we've got something odd here. The electromagnetic shielding on the signal processing unit is showing irregular conductivity patterns. Taylor's checked it twice with the EM variance detector." Marcus examined the readings himself, noting the subtle but distinctive fluctuations in the shielding's performance. In an aircraft designed specifically for electronic warfare, even minor variations in electromagnetic shielding could have significant implications for mission effectiveness and potentially for crew safety. "Good catch," he told Washington, genuine pride in his voice. The young petty officer had come a long way from the uncertain trainee who had first joined the program. "Show the lieutenant what you found." Washington explained the issue to the maintenance officer, demonstrating how their specialized tool detected variances that standard diagnostics couldn't capture. The lieutenant's initial skepticism gave way to concern as he understood the potential implications. "If you're right about this, that aircraft shouldn't fly its mission this afternoon," he said, already reaching for his radio to contact the air boss. "Let me verify it first," Marcus suggested, aware of the disruption that grounding an aircraft would cause to the carefully choreographed flight operations. "We want to be absolutely certain before recommending any schedule changes." Marcus personally rechecked the shielding, confirming Washington's diagnosis. The issue wasn't immediately critical, but in the high electromagnetic interference environment of modern naval operations, it represented a significant vulnerability that could compromise the Growler's primary mission. "I recommend pulling this aircraft from the afternoon schedule," Marcus told the lieutenant, his tone professional but firm. "The shielding degradation isn't catastrophic yet, but it could lead to unpredictable system behavior during electronic countermeasure operations." The lieutenant nodded, accepting the assessment. "I'll inform the air boss. We have a spare Growler that can take its place for the mission." He paused, then extended his hand to Marcus. "Thank you, Senior Chief. That could have been problematic." The handshake was more than a courtesy. It was an acknowledgement from one professional to another, a recognition that transcended rank and role. For Marcus, who had spent decades working without such acknowledgments, the simple gesture carried profound meaning. As their allotted time on the carrier came to an end, Captain Hayes summoned Marcus and his team back to the briefing room. The captain's expression was unreadable as they filed in, standing at attention before him. "At ease," Hayes said, studying them with a penetrating gaze. "I've received the reports from my maintenance officers regarding your inspections today. 4 aircraft with issues that our standard diagnostics didn't catch. 2 that passed your enhanced evaluations cleanly." He let the summary hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Most interesting was the Growler. My electronic warfare officer confirms that the shielding degradation you identified could have seriously compromised mission effectiveness. In a combat situation, that could have put the aircraft and crew at risk. Marcus remained silent, letting the results speak for themselves. I have to admit, Senior Chief, I was skeptical when Admiral Westfield arranged this evaluation, Hayes continued. I viewed it as a disruption to my operations, a bureaucratic exercise that would yield little practical value. He paused, his expression softening slightly. I was wrong. What your team demonstrated today has genuine potential to enhance aviation safety and mission readiness throughout the fleet. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied. That's been our goal from the beginning. Hayes nodded, then surprised them all by asking, how soon could your program be implemented for carrier maintenance divisions? My air wing deploys to the Mediterranean in 4 months. I'd like my maintenance crews trained in these techniques before we leave. The question caught Marcus off guard. He had been focused on proving the program's viability, not on how quickly it could be scaled for fleet-wide implementation. That would depend on Admiral Westfield's decision, sir, but it's possible. Thornton's voice came from the doorway as he entered the briefing room, followed by Admiral Westfield and Captain Reynolds. If the evaluation results are as positive as Captain Hayes suggests. More than positive, Hayes confirmed. I've already drafted a formal endorsement recommending immediate implementation across all carrier air wings. Westfield turned to Marcus, a new respect evident in his expression. It seems your program has passed its trial by fire, Senior Chief. Captain Reynolds and his team have reviewed the documentation from your shore-based training, and now we have confirmation of its effectiveness in operational conditions. The next step is to formalize the program for fleet-wide implementation. The moment was surreal for Marcus, standing in a carrier briefing room surrounded by senior officers who were not just acknowledging but actively endorsing methods he had developed in relative obscurity over decades. The Invisible Man had not only become visible, he had become essential. The journey back to Norfolk passed in a blur of planning discussions and congratulations. By the time they landed, the outline of what would officially be designated the Advanced Diagnostic Maintenance Program was taking shape. Marcus's team would form the core of an instructor cadre, training maintenance personnel from across the fleet in the enhanced techniques they had helped document and refine. In the days that followed, the program gained momentum with remarkable speed. Admiral Westfield, now fully committed to the initiative, allocated resources and cleared bureaucratic obstacles that might have delayed implementation by months or even years. Captain Reynolds, once the most skeptical of the evaluation team, became a passionate advocate, presenting the program's benefits to engineering conferences and maintenance command groups throughout the Navy. Marcus found himself in an unfamiliar but not unwelcome position, at the center of a significant innovation in naval aviation maintenance, his name now attached to procedures and protocols that would soon be standard practice throughout the fleet. The specialized tools he had developed over years of solving problems in isolation were being manufactured in quantity, with funding allocated for continued refinement and expansion of the instrumentation. 3 months after the carrier evaluation, Marcus stood at the front of a newly established training facility at Norfolk Naval Station. Before him sat the first official class of the Advanced Diagnostic Maintenance Program, 50 maintenance personnel from 6 different naval aviation commands, including 10 from the USS Eisenhower's Air Wing. His original team, now officially designated as senior instructors, were preparing to lead breakout sessions following his introduction. As Marcus surveyed the assembled sailors, he felt a momentary vertigo at how much had changed. From the chief who worked in the shadows to the senior chief whose name was on the training manual they all held, his journey had been as unexpected as it was profound. Yet for all the external changes, the new rank insignia on his collar, the commendation medal Admiral Thornton had insisted he accept, the formal recognition of his contributions, Marcus himself remained essentially the same, a man who listened to machines, who heard what others missed, who found satisfaction in problems solved and lives protected. "Welcome to the Advanced Diagnostic Maintenance Program," he began, his voice steady and confident in a way it hadn't been when he addressed his first small team months earlier. "What you'll learn here isn't mystical or magical. It's about extending your senses, about hearing what the aircraft is telling you, about detecting problems before they become catastrophes. Some of you will take to these techniques naturally. Others will find certain aspects challenging. But all of you can learn to be better maintainers than you were when you walked in here today." As he continued his introduction, Marcus caught sight of a familiar face in the back row, Cadet Peters, now wearing the uniform of a naval aviator trainee. The young man nodded respectfully, a silent acknowledgement of the path that had brought them both to this moment. The challenge coin Peters had given him was still in Marcus's pocket, a daily reminder of why their work mattered. After the formal session concluded and the trainees dispersed to their initial diagnostic stations, Marcus found a quiet moment to speak with Peters. "I thought you were in flight school, Lieutenant," he said, noting the new rank insignia the young man wore. "I am, sir," Peters replied. "But when I heard about this program becoming official, I requested temporary assignment to observe the inaugural class. My instructors agreed it would be valuable for a pilot to understand the maintenance side more thoroughly." He smiled, "Especially maintenance developed by the man who saved my father's life." Before Marcus could respond, they were interrupted by Admiral Thornton, who had been observing the training from the sidelines. "Senior Chief," he called, approaching with purposeful strides. "A moment of your time?" "Of course, sir," Marcus replied. "Lieutenant Peters, we'll continue our conversation later." Thornton led Marcus to a quiet corner of the facility, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. "I've just come from a meeting with the Chief of Naval Operations," he said without preamble. "Your program has attracted attention at the highest levels, Williams. The CNO wants to see it implemented not just in aviation, but potentially adapted for surface vessel and submarine maintenance as well." Marcus blinked, taken aback by the scope of what Thornton was suggesting. "Sir, those are entirely different systems with different diagnostic challenges. I don't have expertise in—" "No one expects you to become an expert in submarine propulsion overnight, Williams," Thornton interrupted with a hint of amusement. "What they want is your approach, your methodology for identifying problems before they become critical. They want you to consult with their maintenance experts to see if your diagnostic principles can be adapted to their systems." The implication was staggering. What had begun as a small experimental program within naval aviation could potentially transform maintenance practices across the entire Navy. The invisible man once noticed was now being sought out by the highest levels of command. "There's more," Thornton continued. "The CNO is recommending you for promotion to Master Chief and considering the establishment of a permanent position, Director of Advanced Maintenance Methodologies, to oversee the expansion of these programs across all naval platforms. Master Chief, Director, titles and recognition that Marcus had never sought, had actively avoided for much of his career. Yet now, facing the prospect of broader impact, of lives saved beyond the confines of naval aviation, he found himself not shrinking from the spotlight but stepping more fully into it. "I'd need a strong team," he said thoughtfully. "People who understand the principles but can adapt them to different systems and environments." Thornton smiled, recognizing that Marcus was already thinking through the challenges rather than declining the opportunity. "You'd have whatever resources you need. This has become a priority at levels I honestly didn't anticipate." As they discussed the possibilities, Marcus glanced across the training facility, watching as his original team guided the new trainees through the diagnostic procedures they had helped develop. Chen demonstrating the acoustic resonator with the confidence of a seasoned instructor. Washington and Taylor working seamlessly together to explain the electromagnetic variance detector. Nguyen, once the most uncertain member of the team, now confidently leading a group through the documentation protocols he had helped refine. They had all grown, not just in technical skill, but in confidence, in leadership, in the understanding that their work had significance beyond the immediate task, just as he had. In that moment, Marcus finally understood what Admiral Thornton had been trying to tell him from the beginning. This wasn't just about teaching others to hear what he heard or to see what he saw. It was about recognizing that knowledge kept to oneself, however expertly applied, would always be limited in its impact. True legacy came not from personal accomplishment, but from what was passed on, what was built upon, what continued beyond one's own time. The Invisible Man had not only become visible, he had become a beacon, illuminating a path for others to follow and extend. And in that transformation lay a fulfillment Marcus had never known in all his years of solitary expertise. The profound satisfaction of watching others take what he had begun and carry it further than he could have alone. As he rejoined his team and the next generation of maintenance specialists they were training, Marcus felt the weight of the challenge coin in his pocket, a symbol of lives saved, of knowledge shared, of a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. The Invisible Man had found his mark on the world, and it was deeper and more lasting than he had ever imagined possible.